Welcome to another episode in our Product MBA Product Leadership series. I've been excited about this conversation, and today we are talking customer insight with Humberto Corona, who is PM in machine learning at Booking.com. How's it going?
Hi. Thanks so much for having me, Henry.
No worries. Calling from Amsterdam as well, I forgot to mention. One thing I noticed while I was thinking about right before this conversation is your title is Product Manager in Machine Learning. Maybe briefly, what does that actually mean in terms of how you how do you sort of translate that into what you do, I suppose, and how you deliver value for the organization?
Yeah. In my specific case, it is product management and machine learning because the teams that I work with are the machine learning platform teams. So we build internal products that every machine learning practitioner uses. So this is an area where I think having a background and an understanding on machine learning comes really, really handy, right?
Yeah.
So I'm building products for people who have a similar profile than what I used to do. And so in this particular case, that is what it means. But I've also worked at Zalando in the recommendations team as a product manager in machine learning there. And I would say there's a few problems that are best solved with machine learning or are traditionally solved with machine learnings. And working with machine learning teams is a bit different than working with traditional software engineering teams. Has a few interesting points. I feel there's a lot more uncertainty around what the solution is. Sometimes you need to do a lot of research before finding the right solution. So instead of committing to things as like outcomes, you might have to commit some outputs and manage how you get from those outputs to the outcome that you want and things like that.
Sorry, just a specific example on that, because I think also it's something I'm quite ignorant about, even having read up a lot on how do you leverage AI, etc., in product decision making. And obviously, this is a topic that's going to become more and more relevant to people in product. So, sorry, any specific examples of that?
Yeah, I can tell you that. We were working on a machine learning product recommendation for 2 years ago at Zalando, and traditionally you just need to do a lot of research, right? Like when you replace an AI or ML model by a new one, you expect let's say an increase of conversion. Here, the role of the product managers is two ways. I feel it's understanding what our user needs that might lead to such change and why that change could work, and giving the engineers or the machine learning practitioners the right insights. Things as, for example, imagine the problem of search. People use search when they start their journey. So we need to model that as a problem where we don't have any information beforehand, right? Whether our people use recommendations a few steps afterwards. So it's really important that we model or we take into consideration the previous actions or the searches to be able to model that problem, because people are trying to build a journey and you need to mimic it. Those sort of things.
That's really interesting. So there's a few things I'd never really thought about, having not worked on ML. So I suppose any decision you're making, you're doing a very sort of, double diamond of we really need to delve into what existing data we have to have any idea of what might come next. And I suppose also there's that, that unknown of, correct me if I'm wrong, right? So if you have some sort of ML logic in, taking that out completely for something new, there's a big risk there, right? Of it's unlikely to get it right first time. You need to build it up, etc., etc.
You never get it right on the first time, and the iteration cycles are a bit longer than with other products, right? If you have iteration cycles of 6 to 8 weeks, which means you try something, you try a model, you train it, you do a few changes, you do an A/B test, and you learn something. You usually, from my experience, you need 2 or 3 times to be able to see an uplift on the metric that you're looking at. And 6 to 8 weeks, you multiply, that's quite some time. So that's to start with. But going back to the other part, understanding the data that you have is really important. And I feel there's two parts of it. There's incremental change when you already know that you have the right data, and it's a matter of modeling the problem a bit better because maybe there's a new technique that allows you to better express the customer needs or so on. But I've also seen another case where you have a product that is built on data, and the users are going to use it, right? It will perform better or worse. But if you have something like a recommendation carousel, people are going to see it, people are going to click. And sometimes you simply cannot use this data or have to manipulate it a lot to be able to build a new product that behaves completely different. So that's a very interesting problem. So building the right data set and defining the problem is, I would say, the most important things to make sure you're on the right direction. Similar to, to like every other product management problem.
Yeah, the principles are the same, I suppose. Yeah, because it's, immediately I was thinking, like, how do you segment people, and with such, with recommendations, just think of like the just infinite options and combinations of things. I just even just the thought of like, how do you go from trying to identify like, who are we trying to help, like what the specific problem is, and then moving towards a solution sounds very, very difficult.
Well, I guess like every other problem in that sense, understanding the problem is always really, really difficult, right?
Yeah.
Here the complication comes when, should we solve this problem with ML? And what are the nuances of choosing one approach versus the other, right?
Yeah.
And I think ML is going back to product management for ML, right? It's a lot of understanding the art of the possible. What are the latest trends? How can we use some of those solutions available for the problems that we're trying to solve? But it's a lot of the times to say we are not going to use ML, right? But building the foundations in your product so that you can use that later and then iterate on your solution.
Yeah, great.
So not every team needs it, right? Even like some recommendations team, you might start with something very, very simple. So I've seen there's a lot of, I guess, challenging back and forth between the the machine learning engineers and the product managers around is this the right problem and is this the right solution, and how to best approach, how to get to the end state in the fastest or best way possible.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. Yeah. No, I mean, really, again, similar to any other kind of product, just a bit more complicated. Ultimately the essence, I think, of good product management there is how can you validate something as quickly as possible. And that doesn't always mean, as with the normal product, doesn't mean building custom code for it. It can be no code prototyping, can be digital, can be simply user conversations, right? And I imagine in your case, same thing. It's like, rather than jumping straight to like, let's commit 2 months to a really complex algorithm, what can we do to sort of, validate that as quickly as possible?
Yeah, and here in ML, I think, and I guess it applies to all of their product management problems. I just have only experience in this area, right?
Yeah.
But I feel that we see A/B tests as a way to learn and to ensure that we're on track, rather than a way to validate that we should release or not, right? So you're often doing an A/B test to collect more data so that you can build on top of that, right? And ensure you're going in the right direction. So it's a lot more iteratively than maybe, other problems that you're trying to solve.
It's really interesting also the way you talk about this, because I love the fact that you come at this from really how all products should be looked at, which is that every decision is probably going to fail, and then it completely changes your approach, right? There's a emphasis on learning, and secondly, there is a detachment from, as I picked up from our short conversation, but slight detachment from like, we really want this outcome now, right? And a lot of teams, I feel, distort data. We'll come on to actually this topic in a second. It's very common to just distort data to suit what your needs are, or simply to be not collecting data in a reliable, secure way, and therefore just sort of trying to do what you can to say, like, let's just keep going with what we had planned anyway, whatever the results we're getting. Yeah. And I think the emphasis changes completely how you then make decisions, right?
Yeah. If you see like a lot of the machine learning algorithms, when you make a bad decision or a decision that shouldn't be, or you're not going in the right direction, and you keep going on that, the problems will amplify because the model will learn a certain behavior. And if that's not the behavior you want to show, it just keeps growing and growing, right? So it's almost like you have to be a bit more orthodox around those things, because otherwise they'll kick you in the back really, really, really fast. Working with my teams, we try to always define success criteria for A/B tests before we start A/B tests, and we are very orthodox around those. And if we don't see the results we want, we're not going to roll out, and we already know what's going to happen on a scenario A or B or C. And I feel that's really important to avoid going into that loop of, well, kind of works, let's release it, because we invested so much time on it, right?
Oh my God, the amount of conversations I've had about not doing that, and people tend to do it.
Even things such as, let's say releasing recommendations, and you can think of many very easy ways to release those recommendations. You can show the most popular products, or random products, or trending now products. That decision will affect your system for the next year, because it will be generating data that you will then be using to build on top. So if that data is biased, everything else is biased. So you need to, I feel, build those really good foundations. That will allow you to iterate faster later.
Yeah, that's really, really, it just sounds like the kind of thing every product person should do a couple of months of, right? So just see, it's a lot of, I think a lot of the problem with the product world generally is that people read stuff like, let's do A/B testing and user interviews, but I don't think they rarely see the implications of product decisions, right? So it's easy to read the stuff in theory on one side, but also when they're put into action, there's rarely a reliable feedback loop. And I think that, for me, I see so many anti-pattern, when it comes to simply like doing a user interview, right? Discovery call. Again, biasing data to just suit the idea that you already have about a problem or a solution. A/B testing, again, various anti-patterns around just not collecting the right kind of data, not having the infrastructure, etc. I like that in your case, it's like you have to make the right decision, because there are big implications of not doing so, and a very clear.
I think so, because either you like it or not, the problem is being defined. You're modeling something, you're transforming an input into an output, right? So there's a problem definition internally by the ML model, right? So if you define it, if you are not very careful on how you define it, you're not going to obtain what you want. And this happened to me long time ago when we were model, let's say, I think it was the propensity for someone to take an action for marketing, something like that, or like, how likely are they to click on this or to perform this action? But then the way this was going to be used is to detect people who were not going to do it, who were not going to take action. And we said, okay, we'll just take the bottom half and that would be it. And obviously it didn't work, right? Because we were not optimizing that problem. We were optimizing the opposite, right? And it's not as simple as, let's just flip it around, or at least not a lot of the time.
Talk me through that a bit more, actually. I didn't quite get the point.
Yeah, so you imagine that in that time, I wasn't a product manager. I was, machine learning practitioner back then, and we were building the system. I don't remember quite well, but it was to select the people who were most likely to perform an action. And I think it was click or buy on an item or something like that. And we modeled that problem and we got really good at it. We obtained some really nice results. But we misunderstood the problem, because that was not the problem that was to be solved. The problem to be solved is who are going to buy or click or do something anyway, so that we don't need to show it, right? And so we're going to use the inverse list of users almost. What we wanted to do, or what the people we're going to use this for, was to predict the people who you don't need to show this, right? Which is a related problem, but not the same. And that caused a lot of problems, right? When you try to misuse or use the outputs of the system in a way that was not.
Which is actually, you mean correlation versus causation there, in terms of
it's something similar. Yeah.
It might be a bit
just being super careful on problem definition. I feel and why you're doing something.
Let's a thing that I've been thinking about throughout our conversation is and again, a really I mean, how do I state this? Again, a common problem I see in product is that you have people are reading about these topics, right? A/B testing, ML, being data driven broadly. Yet I feel that in far too many cases, right, the prerequisites for actually making those kind of decisions are not there. So in many cases, it doesn't actually make sense to do A/B tests if, for example, you're very early stage and you don't have tens of thousands of users. If you do not have the architecture, if you don't have the expertise to run reliable experiments, like you should not be doing A/B testing. You're just going to get these false positives, and also you're just missing out on actually the key. What are people talking about that's valuable? What feedback are they giving you that's really valuable? Yeah. Right? High level stuff, focusing on the big things rather than the small things, like color of a button, classic example. Talk me through when it comes to ML. Like obviously, there's a huge amount of power in machine learning in terms of making better product decisions. And you've worked in two big companies, right? Zalando, Booking.com, that are obviously leveraging this well. When is the stage that it makes sense to start committing to building out architecture, firstly to be making like properly data formed decisions, and then when do you feel ML might come into that?
Yeah, I think and I was talking about this with a colleague not so long ago, right? You have, especially when you're starting, you have a list of like 100 problems that potentially you're going to solve to be successful, right?
Yeah.
And I think at the start, a lot of those problems are not problems that have to do with data or with ML or with proper practice of A/B testing. It's about building a lot of foundational and making key decisions that will affect all of your journey, like defining the problem, is there a market fit, and so on, right? Once you see that and all of this, of course, requires, to solve things such as like proper data warehousing, like data pipelines, to build ML, proper infrastructure for A/B testing, you need money, right? And time and people.
Yeah.
So and you always have, or at least how I've seen is thinking about the trade-offs. If we were to, grow with 2 or 3 more people, what is the most that we would get out of them? Like, what is the biggest return? Is it on them building a new feature that all of our users have been asking for the last 3 months, or should we set ourselves for success in the long run? And there's a lot of hype around ML, right? It's everyone wants to do it. Everyone pretends they're doing it. I think it comes later on, right? Which is why, I've worked in companies that are of a certain size, where like, I think like 2,000 people in tech at Booking. So it's a large sort of operation where all of these things make sense and you can invest on them. When you're a small company of like 20, 30 people, unless that is key to your proposition, maybe you can delay those things later on.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, the reason I was writing a book on strategy at the moment, and it's ties into my thinking, which is, as I see it, there are 4 stages. I think first is like understanding the problem is skipped over in most organizations, right? People don't actually understand the core problem within the problem that they're trying to solve, right? They just do it surface level. They miss that, and then they try and skip to, hey, let's use AI in some way. Second one is obviously product market fit, and I think as I see it then is like at that point you can start obviously building data warehouse, start making more reliable decision making. But I suppose, a great example is what we talked about with search recommendation. Like, until you know that search and like listing of, let's say Booking.com, like hotel or accommodation, like, until you know that is going to be a core part of the product and probably for a very long time, then it seems to me a huge investment for something you might actually have to scrap, or that you've got no idea how much value it's going to deliver. So I suppose you're completely right? It's a basic math thing. It's like, do we think we can increase like bookings by 10% if we build an ML team around recommendations, for example?
Yeah, exactly. In some cases, it does make sense. Like if that's, if search is the only avenue for users to discover your content, if you're a content provider, then you need to really invest on search. Like discoverability is a big problem, right? And this is the usual case where ML has shown to perform really well. Now, if that's not at the core of what you do, it can come really late, and you can use very, very simple methods to solve these problems.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
mean,
I
as you
don't
said, right, it's like what's
get
got
that
lots
level
of
of
ratings and like most visited, etc.
yeah, exactly. And it gets you really far away. So in a lot of ways, the products that I built or that I built in the past have added incremental value,
Yeah,
which is substantial. But and again, talking to a few colleagues not so long ago, when you think of incremental value, when you are a 20 billion era company, a 1% is a
yeah,
big chunk,
yeah,
right? When you're like, and that will have huge payoffs. But when you're like a really small startup, you should be focusing on the bigger bets. I feel, or
yeah.
I would be focusing on the bigger bets. Yet, you know, I've never worked on a startup, so.
No. It's really interesting to get your perspective. No, I think it makes complete sense because sorry, something I'm just thinking about working this book, but also, yeah, I've just worked with a few founders where they're trying to shoot for the moon straight away, and it's like, no, you really like if you don't understand the problem, you don't communicate that throughout the organization and to the customer, and you don't start getting product market fit, then that's really hard to do anyway. So even thinking about the next, like fine to think about the next step, but you really need to focus on product market fit first.
Yes.
Maybe final, just a sort of parting piece of advice. Like we've talked a lot about ML, which is super relevant to anyone in product and is going to become more and more so. So that's really helpful. But I'd be interested to know, like, do you think there's any, coming back to customer insight, right? And obviously that's a core part of ML, but are there any learnings that you've picked up sort of working specifically ML that you think are applicable to product managers broadly trying to make more customer-centric decisions?
Yeah. Uh, I would tell you from my experience, I'm a very data obsessed person. So
Yeah,
becoming really, really familiar with your KPIs, right? Whatever those are, your North Star metric, and
yeah,
then breakdown of the main KPIs is really, really important. So in my previous team, what we used to do is have a monthly, I would send a monthly summary email with
mm-hmm.
all of our KPIs, ups and downs, and trying to understand the why each of those KPIs went up and down. And this will really help you understand the product, have better KPIs, potentially understand that you're not solving the problem that you think you're solving.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, sit down weekly. And now I sit down weekly with my team for 5 minutes. We go through the main KPIs, and we have like a 5 minute conversation, you know.
Yeah,
And now I'm very familiar. I know, you know, how many users are using my product, how often are they using it, and I can see anomalies. And if I see a, you know, like an upward trends or a downward trends, and I can explain why, this will really help you understand, you know, kind of what sort of your next steps are. And dive deep is if you have data, right? I think that's also a luxury. Like I work in companies where
yeah,
data is
yeah.
very available, it's
That's
very easy to use.
mm,
If you have data, work with your ML folks on looking at that data at a very granular level to try to understand those deep, you know, like deep problems that you mentioned before. Because a lot of stuff is also hitting at the data.
mm,
But going back to my new role, uh, we don't have a lot of data in my team because I have, you know, 100, 200 users, right? But every of those users is widely available to talk to me.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I'm able to talk to 25 people in a week and really understand what their problems are, because it's really, really easy for me after, you know, like 10 user interviews to see the trends and you know, go deep into, you know, what is really your problem, not what you're trying to say, but rather what you're not saying. But I see throughout, you know, a list of people that are struggling with the same things, yet they don't think this is a problem because they haven't thought of the solution.
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So I think a mix is very healthy.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's such a really good point to finish on because, you know, you work in a very quantitative, data-driven area, yet you still do 10 to 25 user interviews weekly. Like that just shows, firstly, that how important it is to know not only what people are doing, but why they are doing it. But also, you know, the fact that you are doing it every single week just shows really what people should be aiming for. It's like you have to make time for speaking to
Oh,
customers.
I talk to like, because they're very available, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
they talk to me for questions. I talk to at least 10 people every week, which is a delight. I used to be really afraid of talking to our users.
yeah, yeah,
It was a very formal process,
yeah,
recruitment of user interviews and all
yeah,
of that.
yeah,
And over here, just because they're users of our products and it's an internal tool, I can
yeah,
just write a workplace message, and they are happy usually
yeah,
to spend 20 minutes talking to.
And that's true of external users as well. It doesn't have to be formal. You don't have to have two of you doing it and have a glass wall with someone observing behind it. Like, you really don't. Be scrappy and get the main value, I think, is what I always suggest, which is, at the end of the day, can just be you on a Zoom call with someone.
Yeah. Look, or sometimes I remember seeing people on the airplane using the Zalando app. And
oh, cool.
How are they using it?
Yeah.
And asking them a few questions like, oh, sorry, I work at Zalando. What do you think of it? Like,
yeah.
This is really good. This is really bad. Oh, have you tried that? Oh, I haven't heard of that. And then I would write an email to some team being like, hey, I saw this person, blah, blah, blah. Just FYI.
That's really cool. That's really cool. And then also building this culture, right, of using data.
Again, a luxury of being able to work in a product that a lot of people use, right?
Yeah, 100%. Awesome. I think that's a great place to finish on. I definitely learned a lot, felt a little bit out of my depth in the middle of that conversation, but super interesting actually to hear how you approach it, and also just to see the similarities, right, of a sort of normal quote product process and ML process. Yeah. Humberto, is there anywhere you want me to send people, like your LinkedIn? I don't know if you're blogging.
I do blog. I blog a bit about how to solve some of those problems. I think we touch on topics that I blogged about, so you can look at my meeting.
Nice. Well, I'll grab that. Send it through in a PM, and I'll send that out when we launch the talks in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, lovely to talk to you, Henry.